Hey guys, welcome to the Ongaku Concept Podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Annie.
And this is a podcast where we discuss music theory through video game and anime music. This week we're looking at chord function. I just did a video on secondary dominance, so I thought it would be fun to just discuss chord function in general, specifically the tonic, subdominant, and the dominant chords. So if you're not familiar with the way chords are named, there are 7 chords in a major key, in a key. There are 7 chords in a key, and they're called, respectively, the tonic, I'm sorry. I'll let you list them.
What? Okay, so first is tonic, then it's supertonic, then mediant, subdominant, dominant, supermediant, and then, depending on what you have, a flat 7 or a normal major 7, it's a subtonic or leading tone.
The most important of all of these are the tonic, subdominant, and dominant chords. And actually, a lot of people would consider every chord to be, if you boil it down, to be essentially a tonic, a subdominant, or dominant. So those are the 3 most important chords in the key.
It's important to note the relationships to one of them, which is tonic. So when we're looking at subdominance and dominance, we're looking at the different strains of resolution back to tonic. And this is based on the difference between the perfect 4th from subdominant to tonic versus the perfect 5th from dominant to tonic.
So if you're familiar with the way the dominant chord or the 5 chord resolves to the tonic, there's 1 or 2 leading tones if you're using a full dominant 7th that resolve to the 3rd and the root in the tonic chord. For example, in the key of C, if we have a G7 chord, G7 is made up of the notes G, B, D, and F. That B moves up a semitone to C when you resolve down to the tonic, and the F resolves down a semitone to E. And these semitone resolutions are called leading tones, and they're the reason why dominant chords resolve so strongly to the tonic. And a subdominant, like the 4 chord, is kind of a preparation for the dominant. It's a chord that tends to move in that direction.
Well, okay, when we're talking about dominant chords, it's a very different idea between the dominant chord itself with a dominant functioning kind of chord. Really, the broad definition of the dominant is that it creates tension that requires a resolution to tonic and nothing else. So different chord functions have different strengths of resolution to one. For instance, we mentioned the subdominants. They go after dominant in terms of strength. If you want to visualize it, think of an orbital system, like, I don't know, the Bohr atom or the solar system, whatever you want to think about it. So if you take your chords in a major scale and apply it to this orbital chart, you have 1 in the center, and then the first orbital around that, the dominants, you have 5 and diminished 7. The next ring, you have minor 2 and major 4. And then at the very last ring, you have major 6 and major 3.
Right, because the mediants are kind of the weakest as far as like tension goes. So their function is a bit different. They're not intended to build tension so much as, I guess they can kind of be looked at as extensions of the tonic, because both in a major key, your mediants are the 3 and 6 chords, and both of those can function as kind of like a secondary tonic, I guess. In other words, just look up any progression with a 1 chord in it. You can probably find variations with the 3 or the 6 being used instead of the 1, or vice versa. Like in the 4, 5, 3, 6 progression, which I talked about recently in a video, there are many cases where the 3 is replaced with the 1 chord, or even the 6 is replaced with the 1 chord. With that said, the dominant chord isn't the only chord that you can use to build up tension to resolve to the 1. What's important are those two notes. One if you're using a standard major chord. Two if you're using a full dominant seventh that resolve to the one. And as long as you're working those in somehow, you can change the center of the chord, and you can come up with all kinds of different chords to act as the dominant to resolve.
So another common substitution for your dominant functioning chords would be the diminished 7 chord, because taking a look at the key of C major, your diminished 7 chord is going to be diminished. And that one, you have each of those 3 notes are leading into each of the 3 notes in your major 1 chord, although even though not with the true half-step leading tones, it still functions that way. The strongest one is most obviously your B to C. That's a half step, and that's a really strong pull. Then you have your D to E and your F to G. And even though they're whole steps, the fact that they're all going up is enough in conjunction with the B to C to substitute as a dominant functioning chord.
Right. And if you look at a full G7 chord, it's basically a B diminished chord with G on the bass anyway. So the 1 sus4 chord is a dominant functioning chord. I don't think a lot of people really realize that, because I always used to look at it as an extension of the tonic. But lately I've kind of started thinking of it as functioning as a dominant chord, because you do have that leading tone from the 4 to the 3 that you're getting there. And actually, if you were to take like a C sus4 chord, which is C, F, and G, and respell that, you have a G7 sus4.
Oh,
yeah.
So use that,
yeah, isn't it cool?
And then resolve to C again. Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, sus2 chords and sus4 chords are also, like, if you were to take like a C sus2, which is I can't
with
spell
D, C,
yeah,
D, G?
yeah, C, D, and G. If you respell that, D, G, and C, it can act like a D7 sus. It could also...
But then why would that lead back to C?
It wouldn't necessarily. You could go somewhere else with it. I'm kind of rambling at this point. I'm just kind of talking. Like, if you were to take, like, C sus2, C, D, and G, it's also just a plain G sus4.
No. No, stop.
Sus chords are worse than diminished.
I don't like these interchangeable chords.
Fully diminished sevenths are the worst, because since they function as 7 flat 9 chords.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
You can, and since they're symmetrical, so you can have, so one diminished 7 chord is equal to like 3 others, and they can all resolve in like 3 different ways. You can literally go anywhere. It's crazy.
I was never okay with that. When I heard it, we had to do a listening exercise between a half diminished 7 with a fully diminished 7. Did I say bit of diminished? Diminished 7. I didn't know what to do with that sound. I was like, where are we going with it? Well, what does a minor 4 do here? Because you listed that one too.
A minor 4, in my opinion, it functions as a dominant chord. Because, like, in the key of C, just because the key of C is easy, the 4 chord is F, and the minor 4 is F minor, so that would be F, A flat, and C. If you were to put G on the bass, that would be, like, hold on, wait for it, G7 flat 9 sus4.
Wait, no! Why?
But in any case, the A flat resolves down a semitone to G, and the F resolves down a semitone to E. So you have the leading tones to build up tension and resolve down to the tonic. And that's really what's important when talking about dominant functioning chords.
Sorry, I'm getting my pencil working so I can write that down, what you just said. I really know, I need to visualize that. Okay, hold on.
Well, I have actually heard it used, like, a minor 4, like, I was telling you yesterday about the 13 sus4 chord.
Yeah.
It's like an extension to the 9 sus4. If you were to take a minor 4 chord and put the 5 on the bass, which I've heard before.
Minor 4 chord?
Right, so if you have like F minor over G in the key of C.
Okay.
I'll show you some examples after we're done recording or something. That would be a... usually I hear a progression that goes like F over G to F minor over G to C.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like... It would just be like G9 sus4 to G7 flat 9 sus4.
Wait, G9 sus4 to
Right.
G... Did you say G flat?
No, G7 flat 9.
G7 flat 9. Oh, I
sus4.
see that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to extend it. You can't just say G flat 9 or else that sounds like something else. So
You have to say
extend
G7?
it. Right. Because like a G7 flat 9 means a G7 chord with a flat 9 added. If you were to say G flat 9, that would sound like a ninth chord on G flat. So just with chord names, if you want to look at it this way, you can think of... I'm sorry.
I thought like an add... I thought, okay, what you just said, I thought you were describing a G add flat 9. Can you write that? Or...
You could. I've seen it before without the 7th.
Because I had to read up a lot on just naming chords when I was talking to you on Twitter. I had to read like a table of what to call ninth chords, so I thought like if you had just 9, it's implied that the minor 7 is there.
Yes.
Right, so I don't see the problem here.
I was just saying, if you've got like G9 sus4, if the only thing you're doing to that chord is flattening the ninth, you have to say 7 flat 9 instead of just saying flat 9 because, yeah, just to make things clear. It's weird.
I don't like these rules.
I know, it's super weird. Another chord that can act as a dominant is the flat 7 chord. And the flat 7 is really interesting. As we talked about last week, the flat 7 can function as both a subdominant and a dominant chord because it shares notes with both of them. Also, according to some analysts, in a minor key, the 7 chord has a dominant function, which I would agree with. So if you kind of looked at the flat 7 as borrowing from the parallel minor, I think it makes sense why it would function as a dominant chord.
So we can use these chords that we just talked about, especially the dominant functioning chords, to our advantage when we're writing cadences. A cadence is just a chord progression to end a phrase. So a chord progression that's specifically resolves to something. You have your 3 basics, and that's the half cadence, which is any chord to 5. Any chord that resolves to the dominant. Next is your plagal cadence, or the amen cadence, which is a subdominant to tonic. And then you have your full cadence, which all music would end on, and that's a 5 to 1, or to be very broad, at a dominant to tonic.
The plagal cadence, is that how you pronounce it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's also...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Continue.
I've been meaning to tell you this, but it's Picardy.
Really?
Yes.
I've never heard it said out loud.
It's Picardy third.
Okay.
It's also chrono trigger.
So the plagal cadence is not as strong as the full 5 to 1 cadence, just because of the lack of leading tones. It's kind of like really a subdominant to 1, But if you want to find some examples of it, you can check out Grand Metropolis from Sonic Heroes. That's a song with a really simple chord progression, and I think it just goes from the 1 chord to the 4 chord to the 2 to the 4 back to the 1. And so that 4 to 1 movement is a plagal cadence there if you want to check that out. Jun Sonoy uses it quite a lot in his music. So you can probably hear it throughout the Sonic Heroes soundtrack. There's also the deceptive cadence, which is when you have a 5 chord and you resolve to anything but the 1 chord. Usually you resolve up from the 5 to the 6 chord. This is different from a secondary dominant. Those are specific dominant chords on other notes in the key that resolve elsewhere.
That resolve to the tonics of those keys.
The tonics, yeah. So like with a 5 of 5 chord, you have your like in the key of C, that'd be a D7 going to G7, but with a deceptive cadence, you're talking about your 5 chord. So if we're in the key of C, a deceptive cadence would be going from G or G7 to anything but the 1. Usually it would be G7 going up to A minor. But it's deceptive because it's setting you up for this resolution to the 1 chord, and it doesn't go there, so it's a deceptive cadence.
Are there any examples in that? Because I haven't heard a lot.
I distinctly remember hearing one in a Yuki Kajiura song, but I don't remember what it was.
Sword Art?
Oh yeah, I haven't listened to any of her other stuff aside from Sword Art that much, but
I recommend Dot Hack Sign. Probably a better story too.
Yeah, Sword Art story just kind of like it started out strong and then it just like.
I heard it's like it's a stupid what's that called? When all of the characters fall for that one person.
Harem.
Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of had shades of that in the first season, but then it just kind of went full out on it later. I really think it's a shame because the premise was so good and it just didn't live up to it.
Well, if you like the premise of it, Dot Hack Sign. Just pushing that. Sorry.
One of my favorite deceptive cadences is the Picardy third or the Picardy third. And it's when you end a cadence on a major 6 chord. Traditionally, it was used to end a song on the. I think the traditional definition will be to like actually end the song on the major 6 chord. But I think nowadays it's used just in any case where you have a cadence ending on that. I should note that this is different from a 5 of 2 chord. In a 5 with the 5 of 2 secondary dominant, you take your 6 chord and you make it a dominant 7th, or a major chord or a dominant 7th in preparation for the 2 chord. And this is different from that because you're kind of treating the 6 chord like a tonic for a moment. You're resolving from the 5 up to the 6 chord. Oftentimes, the 5 goes up to a some sort of extended 6 sus4 chord, and then it'll resolve to the major one. It's actually pretty rare to hear a 5 to 6 sus4 that doesn't resolve on a Picardy third. I'm usually kind of more surprised when I hear it resolve on the minor, to be honest.
So if we're looking at G7 to A major, right? Why would that make sense having that raised C to C sharp there?
Because it's kind of like, in my head, it's like you're borrowing from the parallel minor for a moment. Because G7 is it's in both the C major and A minor keys, so it makes perfect sense to go from G7 to A minor if you're working in a minor key, or A major. Like I discussed earlier, the flat 7 can be used as a dominant chord, so I guess this is just another function of that, treating the 5 as the flat 7 of the 6 chord, something like that. But yeah, usually I think the 6 sus chord is used to kind of soften that transition to the major 6 chord, because really you can do so much with sus chords. You can really use a sus4 chord to get away with just about any kind of resolution you want to. Because if you start something on a sus chord, then you're allowed to resolve it down to the major chord or the dominant chord, whatever that it's on that route.
Mm-hmm.
I hear it used a lot in like movie soundtracks and stuff where you want to resolve. If you wanted to, like, they're really good for changing keys. You just pick any note ever and put a sus chord on there, and then you can basically change the key from there.
So my favorite cadence, I have two. One of them comes from the Saga Frontier 2 soundtrack by Masashi Hamauzu, the track Variation. In part A, it ends on a flat 2 major 9 to a 1 major 7. And I really like that because so this is an F, and your flat 2 major 9 is going to be G flat, B flat, D flat, right?
Right.
Okay. And then F and A flat. And the three main chord tones in that, the G flat, B flat, and D flat, they all resolve by a downward leading tone motion to F, A, C in the F major 7 chord. So it's really nice. Not only in Saga Frontier 2 do you hear it, but you also hear it a lot. Well, I've played it a lot around bossa nova and lounge music, which I guess that's not credited to the actual composers, but that's just how we like to play around. My band and I like to play around with the music. So it's really fun to go downward. And sometimes an upward leading tone motion can have a very different feel than a downward leading tone motion.
Right.
The downward feels a lot more hip to me, much more modern.
Yeah.
So that's why I like it.
Yeah. I used to look at the flat 2 major 7 and major 9 to 1 major 7 resolution as... I used to look at the flat 2 as a tritone substitution, like an altered tritone substitution for the
Tritone?
5. Yeah, it's a jazz thing. It's like... Okay, so if we're in the key of G, this one's easier. If we're in the key of G, and our 5 chords D7, that's D, F sharp, A, and C. Your 3rd and 7th are F sharp and C. So if you take that chord and you move a tritone down or up, it doesn't matter, a tritone's the same distance either way. So let's just move a tritone down from D. That would get us A flat. And if you have an A flat 7 chord there, just put a dominant on the flat 2. That's A flat, C, E flat, and G flat. If you respell G flat as F sharp, the 3rd and the 7th of the 5 chord are now the 7th and 3rd, respectively, of the flat 2 chord.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, so it functions the same way. That's why it's called a tritone substitution. It's a substitution for the 5 chord, and it's a tritone away. But I used to look at the flat 2 major 7 as a tritone sub for the 5, and even though it doesn't really function like that anymore when you bring that 7th up to a major 7th, but recently I've kind of started looking at it as a substitution for a minor 4 chord because it actually does contain an entire minor 4 chord. Like if we're in the key of G, the minor 4 is C minor, and that's got the notes C, E flat, and G. And our flat 2 chord, key of G, yeah, our flat 2 chord would be A flat, major 7. That's A flat, C, E flat, and G. So it contains an entire minor 4 chord.
There's a word for that, yeah. We call it a Neapolitan 6 chord.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be in
6
first
being
inversion.
like in first, yeah.
Yeah.
And but it does have in the same way that I described the minor 4 chord as functioning like a dominant. I'd say the flat 2 functions like a dominant for the same reason, with the added semitone resolution of that flat 2 bass note moving down to the 1.
Mm-hmm. It works there as a dominant. I've seen some people try to argue that it only can ever function as a subdominant. Because in my notes when I was debating between this reading or the other reading, I kind of looked at it as a altered plagal cadence. And then the next cadence that to me that I really like, that I'm sure everyone knows, it's the flat major 6, 7 to flat major 7 to 1 cadence. And I'm just going to call it from now on the Mario cadence, because why not? You hear this at the end of every level when you capture the flag. But in that song, it actually has to start on the dominant 7, so G7. It goes from G7 to A flat 7 to B flat, and then C. And it sounds really cool. The interesting part about this is that on its, looking at the flat major 7 alone, if you take the flat major 7 to 1, it doesn't have anything that might inherently pull it to tonic, because there's no leading tone. There's no true leading tone anywhere to be found there. It works because you have the tension building up by the ascending bass notes from G to A flat to B flat to C. It feels less like a pull to one, like we see a lot with dominants to tonic, but it feels, because of that, it feels like a push instead to one.
That's a really good way of describing it.
Thank you. I've used it in other kinds of music before, and I think because of that push that you have to develop by adding chords beforehand, like 5 to 6 to 7 to 1, because of that, it makes a really interesting coda. Instead of just depending on a full cadence, you might want to use that in your music next time you're composing, because it's really nice.
Mm-hmm. The flat 7, I'm sorry, the flat 6, flat 7, 1 kind of cadence is really prevalent in a lot of Nintendo music, Mario and Pokemon, and really just take a listen to any of those soundtracks. You can probably find it. You know what else I've heard? I've heard it's common to go from like the 4 to the 5, and then it kind of extend that setup by going to flat 6 to flat 7 to 1. I've heard all of those chords before used as 9 sus4 chords. So you have 4 9 sus4 to 5 9 sus4 to flat 6 9 sus4 to flat 7 9 sus4. Or no, I'm sorry. It starts on the 5 actually. So you have 5 9 sus4, flat 6 9 sus4, flat 7 9 sus4 to 1 9 sus4, which resolves on the 1. It's really weird, but it's really, really cool.
So they do 1 to 1.
Yeah. If you want to hear that, you can listen to the opening theme to Diamond No Ace, the anime, which is Go Exceed. It ends with that kind of cadence. Or Cheer, Tear, Cheer, which is Lisbeth's image song from the Sword Art Online soundtrack. The lead into the chorus has that progression. Thanks for listening. If you've got any comments or questions, you can comment below or email us at ongakuconcept@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at Ongaku Concept or on Tumblr at ongakuconcept.com. And yeah, so thanks for listening. We got a new episode coming up next Wednesday, and there will be a new video on Saturday, so don't forget to check that out.
Bye.
Bye.